Welcome to tonight's event. It's really amazing that there are so many of you here. Tonight we're marking the launch of a report called The Promise of Cross-Subsidy Why Estate Demolition Cannot Solve London's Housing Crisis, and it was authored by Dr. Joe Perry. We believe the research from this report really demonstrates the damage that is currently being caused by affordable housing policies. And we state that very specifically as the question at the heart of the research is what is on offer for this section of the population aside from long-term temporary accommodation.
There are several different dynamics that are at play, all of which to me at least seem important. And one is the sort of the decades-long stigmatisation of council housing and social housing estates as a kind of anti-social infrastructure, by which I mean this kind of representation of council estates as sink estates, as places that are particularly deprived and that are kind of a burden on the quote-unquote taxpayer. The other key thing I think has been the shift from funding to financing critical infrastructure in the UK, and social and affordable housing being kind of fundamentally critical infrastructure, which is increasingly less funded and increasingly more financed. By funding, what I mean is grants that are given by central government where the intention is that you don't pay that grant back, whereas financing is a form of investment where you are expected to repay the debt. So it's a form of debt financing. It's the last dynamic that I talk about, although there are more, is just the financialisation of land in London and the massive increase in land values, which has presented both a problem in the sense that it's created a housing emergency, but also presents itself as a huge opportunity for developers, housing associations, and the local state, effectively, as a way of monetising that land.
There was one, no council accommodation, and two, I was brought into a supposedly emergency accommodation, which I was there for 2 years. And living through that situation really drew me to find out a bit more about housing, and I joined Focus E15 through what I went through. Being on a regeneration estate, you are reminded that effectively that the council sees this place as a brownfield site. It doesn't see the estate as people, as a place where people, human beings, reside in. And you are reminded, without you vocalising, being assertive, asserting your power as a citizen, you cannot get anything done. Language is so important, and the fact that the report highlights it, I do appreciate that, Joe, because when they were talking about social rents, London living rents, it went over my head. It wasn't that I didn't understand it, I just felt like my neighbour next to me is on London living rent, but I'm on social rent, and this other person is on council rent. I do not know why a grounds that are supposed to be on public, in the hands of public ownership, has so many different tenures. It did not make any sense to me. So, when you see in the movie scene, you've got a car stuck on the train tracks and there's a train coming, rushing ahead at full speed to knock it over. You've got the idiot in the car who's moving around everybody in the car except opening the door to get out and run for the hills. And I think that is what we are in this situation right now in housing. We've got so many people, we've got so many levers that are supposedly that the government can push or people can access, but we need a different way of thinking. We need to get out of the car and make a change for ourselves. We don't want to just sit here in this nice, lovely building and not affect change in our communities. I think that is so important.
The government sort of interlinked house building with growth in GDP, and if you're driving house building with profit, we know that it doesn't work. I mean, the report's one really good example of showing how profit-driven markets for housing do not generate increased affordability. It's fundamentally not in developers' interests to build out at a rate where they'd be losing money effectively. There are already 1.5 million homes in the planning system with planning approval that haven't been built. 780,000 of those are in London that haven't been built. So I don't know what they're trying to unlock with these changes, but in a nutshell, these changes kind of are, they're sort of quite tautological in that the government came up with a manifesto commitment for 1.5 million homes, and they proposed a new methodology to assess housing need. It's not really a method to assess housing need, it's a method to assess how to add up to 1.5 million homes based on existing stock. It doesn't take into consideration the number of people in temporary accommodation, it doesn't take into consideration the number of people on social housing waiting lists, it doesn't take into consideration the number of homeless families, none of the things that you would think about in a sort of typical context of housing need. It focuses on existing stock and uses a sort of arbitrary figure to multiply it for affordability. And it comes up with this figure that they've sort of aggregated across the country. And the changes are basically in effect to make it easier for developers to develop land. That's the fundamental principle of it. They want to make it as easy to get planning permission for something, and I don't think they really care what tenure it is. And they're speaking quite a big game because they know if they were to say that openly, there would be a lot more uproar about it. But they aren't. And they're hiding it with a lot of good words and a lot of obfuscation.
I just wanted to reflect a bit on the MPPF consultation. It's actually written in ways which concede what it actually does, which makes it rather difficult. And a lot of it is doesn't seem to be very explicit what they're going to do. Except there's one paragraph, paragraph 65, which is directly relevant to what we're talking about tonight. And it says this: to support the reuse of brownfield land, where vacant buildings are being reused or redeveloped, any affordable housing contribution due should be reduced by a proportionate amount, equivalent to the existing gross floor space of the existing buildings. That's the one place where they make it absolutely clear that they want to reduce the amount of affordable housing, and that they consider that reducing the amount of affordable housing to knock down council estates is the way they want to continue.
I live in sheltered housing in Camden, and I was told that Camden has a policy of allowing people who have houses and can't sell them and be able to afford to live in Camden to take up social rental housing, which seems rather extraordinary to me. They can still keep their houses. I don't know if they're allowed to rent their houses out, I assume they are, but they can actually have social housing. So, I mean, we should move away, watch and move away from sort of a human rights definition, of social council housing to a neoliberal definition of social housing, where anybody who has a housing problem can take it up.
Can we call it social murder? Can we call it social exploitation? Are we ready for that yet? And if so, is this not a human rights? Are we, like you were saying, is it a human right that is being breached here, not just planning policy?
I would like to correct the use of the term social housing. I'd like to see all of us fighting for council rents. I agree with that as well. Could we please all ditch that social housing category that we keep using? It's not helpful. We're looking for council rents. That's what people need right now. Thank you.
We don't want to play around with whether it's truly affordable or genuinely or affordable or whatever. What we need is council rents. And if we can get something that's around that, then actually everyone benefits. Because it's, as everyone knows, it's so much lower than housing association rents, private rents, etc. So why not just have council rents as the campaign issue there?
I think what really stands out is that regardless of the different kinds of approaches, regardless of who the developer is, be they Lend-Lease, an international global corporate developer, or be they a council, the cross-subsidy model just doesn't stack up. It overproduces the housing that London has the least need for, and it underproduces, if not reduces, the tenure of housing that we have the most need for, obviously council and social housing.
We've seen primary schools closing, we've seen teachers not being able to live, in the areas that they work in, we've seen nurses not being able to take up training positions in hospitals, and it's all down to the fact that we've, created a housing situation that's predominantly unaffordable for most people. Yeah. Use of the terms kind of genuinely affordable or affordable are incredibly misleading. I think, the discussion tonight about just calling it out and saying all we need is council homes and council rent, I think is incredibly helpful, because pinning affordability to the market when it's obviously inflated by the model that the developers are using, and in the interests of developers. And I think that's what this comes down to, like, who are houses being built for? Like, if we're predominantly trying to provide the council homes that we need, which we should be, which is the essence of kind of human rights and the kind of interests of public bodies to be able to provide for residents, we need to be doing that at council rent and not at a model that just kind of creates a different society.
The elephant in the room that no one talks about, that there's a financial incentive to actually socially cleanse, and hence the estate demolitions. They're not there because they're dilapidated. They could be easily refurbished. It's just financially incentivized on so many levels to actually do an estate demolition. When you do an estate demolition, you could build more houses on the site. Hence, you don't have to replace like for like. Because of the change in the planning laws, you could actually create much more denser. The only people who have a right of return are the social housing tenants. A lot of the tenants in those estates exercise their right to buy, so they don't have a right of return. So you just pay them out, and then you replace them with private tenants, and then you change the mix of the area. You've got more residents coming in who are paying council tax, not on benefits. They don't use the local services, and you get a new homes bonus from the local government as well, which is not ring fenced. So it's actually financially incentivized.
You see on my estate that homes are empty. And you kind of, I'm only on Twitter, and I think if I had more social media presence, the message would get further. And the council say, we're dealing with the voids. But it's like, but you created the voids. It's like, it's not that hard. You get some money, you fix it up, you move someone in, and sometimes it doesn't need fixing up. They will literally spend hundreds of thousands of pounds buying back a leaseholder, 4-bedroom, nearly 500,000, and literally bought it up a few days later. And then they still will say, bare face to your face, they will still say, we're working on the voids. We have, they've never said we have no money, but you have to kind of catalogue it. For when they do say there's no money, you have to say, well then why have you spent millions of pounds on our estate buying back homes that you've left empty? How can you say you have no money? Or why have you spent 14 million building a block with just 30 properties in? That's their decant block. And then it's not only that 14 million, they don't have that money. Even the millions they've spent buying back, they don't have it. That's all got interest, and it's all debt money. So it's like they're just the future people of Lambeth, the future, council taxpayers have got this huge burden that they're going to have to pay, and it just doesn't make sense at all. So we've got to constantly be telling that story, I suppose.
These properties, when you go at night time, you see them all empty. They're still making money because they're just getting the cash back from the taxpayer, which the taxpayers is as a cross-section of society, but it's from the vulnerable people that they've got out of those flats in the first place. So it's like, it's a very oppressive way that our system has got to. What you've done in that report is what is happening and what's led to what has happened. And it doesn't matter what government is in place, because they're just saying we're going to build all these houses and that's going to satisfy everyone. But when people start to break it down, 65% of social tenants or council tenants are not going to be rehoused. They're going to be rehoused in these affordable houses, which are not very affordable, even to people like we live in London, right? So in Canary Wharf, you've got professionals. They can't afford the rents, they can't afford to have a mortgage. You know, so it's so the report is very good. It hits it right on the nail. You know.